is any kind of, to me, entertainment is any kind of interaction that evokes an emotional response. And that could be a good book. It could be canoeing on Marge's lake. And by the way, Marge, the invitation is still lost in the mail. It could be a movie. It could be live entertainment. It could be concerts in the park. It could be any kind of entertainment that evokes, in my opinion, an emotional response is entertainment. The majority of people that I know, and myself, I include myself in that, is I prefer live because I like to share that emotional response with, whether it be one person or 1,000 people or 100,000 people. So that to me is what entertainment is. And of course, being at the theater, that's our business. You know, we want to invoke that emotional response. And when we're not able to do so, it's really difficult. And I can tell you, well, first of all, thank you for allowing me to have this chat with you today. It's been a very interesting 16 months. I can tell you that when the emergency order was put in place in March of 2020, it was 2 days after the Bay City Rollers. And I don't know if anyone attended that show or not, but it was interesting because when we booked the show, the Bay City Rollers, I wanted the Saturday night. Of course, their famous song, SATYDY night. And I couldn't get Saturday night because somebody else wanted Saturday night. So we took the Wednesday. And ironically, they couldn't do the Saturday night because the emergency order came down on the Friday. So our last show was Kim Mitchell, and the next day we were locked down. Whether it was denial or a sense of optimism, but I did not think that it would last for 16 months. In fact, we started to plan for our events in June of 2020. So we were all very optimistic that this would be a very temporary passing situation and we'd be back to normal at least by June, because of course, April, May, and June are the busiest times in the theater. That obviously did not happen. Our first difficult task that we dealt with, of course, was laying off all our staff. When it looked like it was going to run more than 3 or 4 months, we had to lay off all of our front of house staff, all of our backstage staff, all of our box office, and all of our bar staff. The city of Richmond Hill, and I give a huge shout out to them. They did whatever they could to keep as many staff employed as possible. And of the 7 full-time we have at the theater, 5 are still employed. So I thank the city for their support of the staff, not only of the theater, but also the entire corporation. They really struggled to find positions, and they moved people from, backstage area to groundskeeping, to call centers, to you name it. Whenever there was a job available, all staff were offered opportunities. So the city really did a great job in trying to keep as many people employed as possible. The biggest task we faced when this whole situation unfolded was, how do we stay connected to our community with the arts, especially at a time when the arts are needed the most? You think about, throughout human history, whenever there was a very trying time, think of the art that came out of, say, World War I or World War II. Whenever there's a crisis, people gravitate to the arts as a way of coping, as a way of bringing them through it. And of course, we weren't allowed to do that. We weren't allowed to bring people together to enjoy the arts and to use the arts as a therapeutic method to help them through the situation. So our task was, how do we keep our community engaged in the arts at a time when it was impossible and actually illegal to bring people together and congregate as large groups? So of course, our first thought was virtual, and I know, and I agree, staring at a screen is not the best option, but in the first little while, that was the only option. So we started the A Part Of program on our Facebook page. And every Thursday at 7 p.m. for 36 weeks, we had local artists and local performers donate their time. And we had a live performance, a stream performance every Thursday at 7 o'clock on our Facebook page. What that did is it reminded people of the importance of the arts excuse me, and that one day we would be together again. It also reminded people that even though we were apart, we can still be together. We can still be part of a larger community, a larger arts organization. And I believe that it helped. I believe that it was something that we as a community could look forward to. It was an opportunity for artists who gave freely of their time to give back in the arts at a time when the arts were needed the most. And it wasn't in person, but it was something. And at least the arts community stepped up to the plate, and nobody was paid. And the number of people that we had offer their time and their services to participate in this was truly remarkable. And I'm humbled every day when I think about the amount of support that we got. Artists who are self-employed, they weren't eligible for CERB in the short term. So they weren't working. There was one artist who talked about he didn't know when his next meal was coming from. Like, it was literally that dire for a lot of artists, but he still gave of his time, and he sent us a video, and it was wonderful. So the virtual program, I think, was sort of a very, almost like a glue that held us together as a community through the situation. The other thing we did is, while we were doing the Apartheid program, the question kept gnawing at my brain: how do we bring artists and community together? And in March of 2020, I started the conversation with the city. In fact, it was still snowing out when I started the conversation about doing drive-ins. And we were the first community, I believe, in Ontario, possibly in Canada, that started that conversation. Now, it was brand new. It took a lot of time. It took a lot of discussion. It took a lot of conversations before the city would give it the go-ahead. Of course, COVID was brand new. We didn't know what the restrictions were like. We didn't know of the health and safety issues. So we did not get the green light to go with drive-in concerts until July. But we talked about it from March to July to actually have it happen. And the city of Richmond Hill actually paid for those concerts. All the concerts we did last summer were free, and we had 175 cars per show, usually 4 to 5 people per car. So we had several hundred people show up at the Tom Graham Arena, and we presented those concerts for free. I think we started something because as soon as we announced our drive-ins, all sorts of drive-ins started popping up all over the GTA, and some of them were charging $200 to $300 a car. We charge nothing. So I think that was a way of the city giving back to the community. We only did 6 last year, but it was a way of connecting our community with our artists, and that was so important. In fact, the artists were paid for the drive-ins, and the first concert we had, I had an artist come up to me, and even though it wasn't legal, he gave me a big hug, and he said that it was his first paycheck since March. So not only were we contributing to the well-being of our community, we were also putting money in the pockets of artists who actually had no income at that time. So that was a very stirring moment. The Apartheid program continued to New Year's Eve. In the meantime, while we're doing the Apartheid program, which Ellie was the one who spearheaded most of that, we were told that our box office software program was being sunsetted, in other words, going bankrupt at the end of the year. So we had to find a replacement system. And that took 6 months. So even though we were in the background, we were quite busy trying to come up with a new box office software program. And we did find one called Audience View. And it did take 6 months from the day we just started the conversation to the day we actually launched it. And our first test for that was the very successful virtual speaker series that Marge talked about. And we did that in cooperation and partnership with Connecting the Community. The speaker series was another way of connecting with our community, obviously, and it kept our community engaged. But also, full transparency, it also provided us with an opportunity to work out the glitches in the new box office software. It was our first time using this software, and it's a very, very sophisticated box office software. From an audience perspective, it's actually quite easy. You just do a few clicks and you're done. but the back end, if you will, was very complicated. So we had a couple of glitches that we had to work out. And I thank Marge and Mary and all the patrons who participated in that series for their patience, because we did find that there was a few little things that we were doing in the coding that weren't quite the way they should be. So it caused a bit of anxiety. But in the end, it was a very worthwhile system. And going forward, as we start preparing for opening, it's vastly superior to the old system. So we're very pleased, and it was time well spent in getting prepared for, and everything that we've done since March of 2020 has been preparing for post-COVID. Like everything that we do is about what happens after this whole situation is over. We also did live streaming. We live streamed the last concert at the drive-in, which was a huge success. We did some virtual programming in cooperation with Event Services. We did New Year's Eve, which was 2 shows. We did a first portion was a family program featuring Splash and Boots. So it was very much for the families and for the kids. For the adults, we streamed a performance of Huey, a tribute to Huey Lewis and the News. Both performances drew over 3,000 views. It's not in person, but it's entertainment. 3,000 people saw what we were doing and were engaged. And we hope that was their form of entertainment as a way of ending a rather nasty year with hopes that 2021 will be better. So we enter 2021. The pandemic is starting to wind down. The second wave is winding down. The provincial government is allowing us to live stream events in the theater without an audience. So we start working on booking performances that could be live streamed to the presenters' audiences literally around the world. And that's the beauty of live streaming, is that you can be anywhere on the planet, or if you really want to get crazy, on the space station, and you can watch a live stream event from Richmond Center for Performing Arts. So we became global, virtually, but we became global. And it was a hit. I mean, we were doing a lot of live streaming. We had a number of events booked in. We were booked for the entire month of March. And then the third wave hit. And I think that was the hardest part of all of this, because nobody expected it to be as intense as it was. By March, of course, everybody was wearing masks. Distancing was sort of the state of a normal part of our daily routine. And of course, the vaccinations had started. And, you know, when you're listening to the those who were organizing and implementing the vaccination, you know, they figured by the end of May, we'd be drowning in vaccines. So there was not going to be a third wave. So the third wave kind of hit us, blindsided us, I think is the word. We had to stop everything. Theater. We had March booked, we had April booked, we had May booked, all of that stopped. And we were surprised. So we had to transition back to a shutdown. And there was a difference between, for us, were we closed or were we shut down? In our case, we were shut down. Like we weren't even allowed in the building. Like that's how intense the third wave was. And it wasn't expected. So that was a real challenge. So because we didn't expect it, we didn't plan for it, perhaps as well as we could have. But as soon as that happened, we began working on a summer series, because we didn't know how long this third wave was going to last. So of course, the sports pavilion at Richmond Green is being used as the vaccination center for Richmond Hill. So the Tom Graham Arena was no longer available to us. So we started conversations with Metrolinx to present our drive-in concerts this summer at the GO Station parking lot at Major Mac and Newkirk. Took a bit of time. Metrolinx is a big organization, a lot of layers of bureaucracy to go through, but they did give us their approval. And our first drive-in concert took place on Canada Day. And we're doing 8 concerts. So it's not concerts in the park, it's concerts in the parking lot this year. They're beginning this Thursday, July 15th, and they do July 29. They were doing every Thursday in August. The Good Brothers are coming the first Thursday in August, and then the first 2 Thursdays in September. And what we've decided to do is dedicate the final concert to showcase Richmond Hill-based talent. We've had so much support from our community that we wanted to dedicate an entire evening to local artists. We invited auditions. We sent out an audition notice in March. Generally, when we do an audition notice, we get between 30 and 35 performers. This year, we had 70 artists who wanted to come in and audition for our concerts in the parking lot. And what's interesting is that none of them expected to be paid. They thought this was going to be a free event. And I said, no, you're getting paid for it. And they were surprised. So even though they haven't worked in a year, they still wanted to give back to the community, and they weren't necessarily expecting to be paid. But we are going to pay them for it. So when we opened up the registration is a bit different this year. We're using ActiveNet through the city as opposed to the theater's box office. Still maybe have a few glitches, we're not sure yet, but we're using ActiveNet for that. When we opened the registration last week for the first 4 concerts, they filled up in 30 minutes. So there is a demand. There's no question that people are anxious. They want to engage with artistic experiences. So what's next? Where do we go from here is the famous sentence. Phase 3 guidelines were announced last Friday. Phase 3 guidelines said that we could have 50% capacity. However, we love the however part, with restrictions. And those restrictions mean we have to physically distance our patrons. So that means we can fit 150 people in the auditorium, in the orchestra and the balcony section. So that has been presented to the city. I'm waiting for approval from the city. Once we get approval from the city to open to 150 patrons, we're bringing back our front of house staff in the next week or so to begin training. We will start screening films in August or early September. Over this past 16 months, I've been very fortunate to connect with a number of independent filmmakers who are looking for opportunities to screen their work in Richmond Hill. Sean Cisterna has been an ambassador for that. He knows everybody in the film industry. And we're hoping that as we go forward, one of the positives out of COVID is that we're going to be showcasing a lot more independent Canadian films at the Richmond Centre for Performing Arts as part of the Real Thing series. So we're happy about that. So the last big question, of course, is what happens after phase 3? We're thinking perhaps Saskatchewan. Saskatchewan, of course, has dropped all restrictions. Everything is 100% capacity. So we don't know what's going to happen in post phase 3, which is supposed to expire on August the 6th. We're hoping it's 100% capacity with no restrictions. However, that being said, we will do whatever we do as long as we do it safely. One thing that we've learned and we will never compromise on is the safety of our audience, our artists, and our staff. So that's what we hope. The reality is, are we going to face unexpected setbacks? Yes. I've heard a 4th wave is scheduled to arrive in September. I don't know what that means. I don't know what that looks like, but we plan for it. But I can assure you going forward that regardless of what happens, we will continue to do whatever we can do to keep our artists and our audiences engaged, because this will end. And I'm hoping if Massey Hall is any indication, they announced their season about 2 weeks ago. They're going full capacity, 2,000 seats in their brand new venue starting in November. We hope to follow suit. We're not bringing in Gordon Lightfoot, unfortunately. They've got 3 shows of Gordon Lightfoot. They've already sold out. I did actually contact his agent to say that he should do a warm-up gig in Richmond Hill just to get ready for Massey Hall. But he's playing Vegas already, so he doesn't really need to do a warm-up. But the point is that as soon as we get any kind of green light, we have literally hundreds of artists, from Jan Arden to an artist down the street playing his guitar on the street corner, who are anxious to play. And we will be bringing back those artists as quickly as we possibly can within the restrictions of the day, because we believe that we need the arts and the arts need us, and we will do whatever we can to bring them back together as soon as possible and safely. Thank you.